in Hampton County, Massachusetts, on a summer evening. A light drizzle had begun at dusk, quickly turning into a full-on downpour. The wind howled in bursts, sweeping along dry branches, decaying leaves, and peeling billboard signs lining the highway. In the midst of the pouring rain, an ambulance bearing a Hampton County license plate sped down the flooded road, its flashing lights piercing through the thick darkness like needles in the night. Inside the vehicle sat a 17-year-old girl. Her left arm was pressed tightly against her body, trembling intermittently as if it, too, was afraid of something unseen. Her hand was swollen, the fingers slightly curled in on themselves, with pale nails that looked as if blood no longer flowed properly through them. Her elbow was oddly swollen, the skin stretched tight, as though trying to hide something twisted and unnatural beneath. Every time the ambulance jolted over a pothole, she bit her lip hard enough to draw blood, her breathing ragged, like one more movement might cause her entire body to shatter. Cold sweat soaked her forehead and trickled down her pale cheeks. And yet, strangely, she did not scream. There were no cries of agony, no writhing in pain, like one might expect from someone enduring such excruciating injuries. Instead, her face was ghostly white, drenched in rainwater and eerily empty, hollow in a way that sent chills down the spine. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling of the ambulance, showing no reaction as the emergency medical technician gently peeled the soaked jacket from her injured arm. "Emily, can you hear me? Are you listening?" the accompanying nurse asked softly, brushing her fingers across the girl's forehead. Cold, like ice. Emily Carter, 17 years old, a junior at a small high school in Massachusetts. The call had come from an old wooden house on the outskirts of town. Neighbors reported screams that went on, the sound of furniture crashing, and one sharp, gut-wrenching cry. When police arrived, the front door was wide open. Emily was curled up on the tile floor, her right arm bent at a strange angle, her clothes soaked through. She didn't say a word. Wrapped in a blanket, she was rushed straight to County Hospital in the middle of the most violent thunderstorm of the month. As the ambulance pulled up to the emergency room entrance, raindrops pelted hard against the glass. Nurse Diane Mitchell, on night shift, had already been waiting after hearing the call over the radio. Clipboard in one hand, clutching her coat with the other, she stepped out into the wind, which threatened to rip the umbrella right out of her grip. The medics wheeled the gurney out, and for the first time, Diane saw Emily's face under the hallway lights, a face still holding the softness of childhood, but drained of all color. Beads of cold sweat dotted her forehead. Her cheeks were flat, not flushed, as if there was no warm blood flowing beneath the skin anymore. The way the girl stared into empty space made Diane's skin crawl, as if Emily had grown used to pain without protest. As if tears had long since become a luxury her heart no longer had the strength to summon. "How old is she?" Diane asked quickly as they wheeled Emily inside. 17. Looks pretty small and underweight for her age. Injury to the right arm, likely a fractured humerus. No excessive reaction, but something's off about her, the emergency medical technician whispered, lowering his voice. You just have to look into her eyes to see it. Emily was brought into Trauma Room 3. The rain still howled against the glass windows. Diane gently pulled back the blanket, carefully inspecting her arm from shoulder to elbow, inch by inch. Bruising had spread around the elbow, deep purple and visibly swollen. But Emily didn't blink. Her lips were pressed into a tight line. "Emily, can you hear me?" Diane tried again, this time gently holding the girl's left hand. Emily gave a barely noticeable nod. "Did someone hurt you?" Diane's voice was warm and soft, the kind that carries a sense of safety only someone who's seen too much can truly give. It wasn't a question she ever asked lightly, but this time, she knew she had to. Emily remained silent, but for a brief moment, her eyes flicked toward the door, quick, sharp, like she was afraid someone might be listening. And then in a whisper, "I fell down the stairs." Diane froze. It was the kind of answer that was too perfect, like something learned by heart, a programmed reflex. "Okay, I understand. I'm going to call the doctor in to check your x-rays now. You don't have to worry about anything, all right?" Diane softened her tone and offered a small smile, then quickly glanced down at Emily's leg. There was an old bruise near her shin, already fading green, much older than the fresh injury on her arm. A resident entered the room, carrying a splinting kit. Emily flinched slightly at the sight of the syringe, but didn't overreact. It wasn't until the X-ray machine swept over her body that she turned her face away, curling her hands in close, as if afraid the light might expose something hidden deep inside. A distant crack of thunder echoed through the night. Diane turned toward the window. The rain was still pouring, but inside her, a different kind of storm was brewing. A storm made of old memories and a growing, uneasy instinct. Emily Carter. The name hastily scribbled on the white intake form. This wasn't just a broken arm. Diane knew it, and something told her this night wouldn't end with just a simple cast, not with that look in her eyes, not with those bruises, not with that terrifying, unnatural silence from a 17-year-old girl. By the time the clock passed 2 a.m., the emergency room had quieted down. The urgent doctor calls, the rattling gurneys, the muffled sobs from other patients, all faded into the damp hush of night. Only the steady tapping of rain on the windows and the soft beeping of heart monitors remained. In the corner of room 3, Emily Carter sat curled up on the hospital bed, her right arm secured in a splint. She wore an oversized hospital gown, her pale face as still as stone, silent and unmoving, like a statue carved from fear. Nurse Diane walked in, carrying a clean set of clothes and a small towel. She closed the door gently behind her and sat down in the chair next to Emily, saying nothing at first. Emily glanced at her, a quick, detached look. That gaze was still distant, not defiant, but not willing either. "I think you're cold," Diane said in a low, warm voice. With rain like that, anyone would be shivering. There was no reply, only the faintest nod. Diane gently wrapped a towel around Emily's damp hair, dabbing away the last drops of rain. She didn't jump into the questions that were burning in her mind. Over a decade in this job had taught her one thing. Children who are abused don't fear the pain as much as they fear being found out. As she helped Emily out of her wet clothes and into dry ones, Diane paused. Under the soft yellow light of the ceiling lamp, beneath Emily's pale skin, bruises began to show. Faded blotches of blue and green, one on her left shoulder, a long smear along her side, a round mark on her lower back, where the ribs meet the spine. Diane said nothing, but her hands trembled slightly. "Do you fall often?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "At home, do you have to do any heavy chores or physical work?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "Then, where did these come from?" Silence. Longer this time. Then in a voice barely audible, like she was talking to herself. "Sometimes I just fall. Or maybe from gym class." Diane took a deep breath. She knew Emily wasn't telling the truth. And that look, that instinctive response, it was all too familiar. It was the same one Diane used to give when she was a child. "Emily," she said gently, placing a hand on the girl's uninjured arm. "You're safe here. We just want to help. No one can hurt you anymore." The hospital room was so quiet, you could hear the IV drip ticking out each drop in slow, deliberate rhythm. The bedside lamp cast a soft yellow glow across Emily's pale face. Minutes passed after Diane's reassuring words, but the girl said nothing more. Diane didn't rush her. She knew some children needed time to break through an invisible wall made of carefully rehearsed lies they had told so often they began to believe them themselves. Finally, Emily slowly turned her head. Her voice was barely a thread, fragile, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a story, like a tape playing back in slow motion. "My dad used to be a soldier. He fought in Afghanistan. After the army, he worked fixing machines. Back then, whenever he got paid, he'd bring home hot dogs for me and my 2 little brothers. When I was little, my favorite nights were when he'd take us all out to eat." Diane stayed quiet, letting her go on. "Then my mom, she got pregnant with the 4th kid. She couldn't keep her part-time job at the bakery, so she stayed home and sold handmade crafts online. That's when Dad started getting more stressed. Some days, he came home completely worn out. He wouldn't talk to anyone. Some nights he drank. Just sat there, staring at the TV. I cooked dinner, and if it was a little too salty, he'd snap. He yelled at Mom. Emily paused. But I know he didn't mean it. He was just tired. He always wanted everything to be perfect. He used to say, in the army, if you don't get every detail right, you die. Her voice grew heavier. Last week, I got a 94 on a test. I studied really hard, but when I showed Dad the score, he didn't say anything. He just set his piece of bread down, got up from the table, and went to find the leather strap. She didn't go on, but Diane could picture the rest. Her chest tightened, not because what Emily said was particularly shocking, but because of what she didn't say. There was something in the way she chose her words, the pauses, the way she avoided eye contact. It was like pieces of the story had been deliberately left out. Diane gently shifted the conversation, her voice soft. When your mom was home, did you help her with anything? Yes, Emily answered quickly. She taught me how to cook, clean, and do all kinds of things, but it never really felt like Dad was proud of me for it. I think maybe I just wasn't good enough, she added, her voice starting to waver. Her eyes were glassy now, but no tears fell. If I were better, if I knew how to make him proud, maybe he'd smile again like he used to. Diane squeezed the cold hand in hers, her heart twisting. That subtle denial, it was something she'd seen too many times. Children who were quietly abused often clung to the best parts of the person who hurt them. They needed to, because it was the only way the pain made any sense. Emily hesitated. I think maybe it's because I wasn't careful. Dad just wants what's best for me. Mom used to say, I had to learn how to obey. That's the only way to keep peace in the house. Diane blinked slowly. Emily's words sliced into her like a thin, sharp blade, cutting straight into a memory she thought she had buried for good. The beatings from her own father, a former soldier, they had always come with the same cold explanations. I'm teaching you a lesson. You didn't do it well enough, and out there, the smallest mistake could cost you your life. Do you understand that? Diane said nothing more. She knew. Emily wasn't ready to tell the whole story, but that was exactly why she needed protection more than ever. Diane gave her some medication, gently reassured her, and stayed until Emily fell asleep. By midday the next day, the atmosphere in the hospital suddenly shifted. Diane had just stepped out of Emily's room to pick up her prescription when she got a call from the front desk. The family of patient Emily Carter is here. They're demanding to see a doctor immediately. As she entered the hallway, she spotted a large man pacing back and forth in agitation. He wore a worn-out work jacket, his movements sharp and restless. That was Jake Carter, Emily's father. His sun-weathered face showed the weight of years, but his eyes were tight with tension. Beside him stood Emily's mother, Maggie, clutching her handbag with both hands, her body drawn in, silent and hesitant. Why the hell hasn't she been released yet? I'm her father! You can't just keep a child here without the parents' consent, Jake barked, then suddenly slammed his hand down on the reception desk, startling everyone nearby. Diane walked up, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Carter, please remain calm. The head physician will be with you shortly. Emily is being cared for and is safe. Safe? She's safe at home, too. We're her parents. You have no right to keep us from seeing her, and you sure as hell don't get to decide when she leaves. She broke her arm. She's not a damn hostage. You're treating her like a prisoner. A few patients down the hall turned their heads to look. A resident nurse in the back discreetly reached for the emergency button to call security. The air tightened, like a wire drawn too far. Jake started stepping toward Diane, eyes blazing. Maggie tried to grab his arm to stop him, but he yanked himself free without hesitation, rough and unforgiving. Diane didn't step back. Jake roared. What did she tell you? Listen to me, that girl's a damn liar. Let her out of here and send her home with her family, now! He slammed his fist down on the nearby metal counter. The sound echoed sharply, making several young nurses jump. I'm her father! You people have no right! Inside her hospital room, Emily heard the shouting. She trembled uncontrollably, both hands clenching the edge of the bed. Her eyes stayed locked on the closed door, wide with panic. Those sounds weren't strange to her, they were too familiar. Familiar in a way that haunted her. Just then, Dr. Sarah Collins appeared. Calm but firm, she stepped forward and said clearly, "Mr. Carter, we've seen signs of physical trauma on Emily's body and suspect she may be a victim of abuse. Under Massachusetts state law, we are required to keep a minor under hospital protection for a minimum of 72 hours, pending full assessment by Child Protective Services." "What?" Jake spun toward Sarah, growling. "I'll sue every damn one of you! You people are making this up!" Then he did something no one expected. He lunged forward, ripping the patient file out of Sarah's hands, raised it like he was about to throw it. But security arrived just in time. 2 uniformed guards rushed in, grabbing Jake and forcing him into a chair. He struggled violently, yelling at the top of his lungs, "Let me go! She's my daughter!" Sarah stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly, but she held her ground. Diane stepped toward Maggie, who had stood motionless the entire time, like a statue. Diane said gently, "Mrs. Carter, please come with me to a private room." Maggie didn't answer, but her eyes met Diane's, eyes filled with shame, fear, and something else. Something quieter. Pleading. The chaos slowly died down. Jake was taken to the police station for temporary detainment. Diane walked slowly down the hallway, still trying to catch her breath. She was heading back to her office when she heard hurried footsteps behind her. It was Maggie, still clutching the same old handbag in the same wrinkled clothes. But something in her face had changed. She handed Diane a small tote bag of Emily's clothes. Diane said softly, "Thank you. Would you like to see Emily? But we'll need her consent." "No," Maggie whispered, shaking her head. "I can't. Jake would—" She bit her lip. Her eyes dropped to the floor, then suddenly she turned and walked away. Diane turned back and looked through the window toward room 3, where Emily lay in silence. She hadn't said a single word all day. Diane didn't pressure her to talk, but when night fell and the last of the hallway noise had faded into stillness, Emily finally spoke. "The first time my dad hit me was because I stepped in front of my little brother Ken. He accidentally broke the TV remote. Dad yelled and grabbed his belt. I stood in front of Ken, so he hit me instead. All of it." Her voice was flat, emotionless. No tears. Diane said nothing, her hand still resting gently over Emily's. "I thought, if I stayed quiet, if I took the beatings, maybe Dad would calm down. Maybe he wouldn't hit Mom or Ken. I tried so hard to get good grades, to cook well, to keep the house clean. But the more I tried, the more he seemed to hate me." Diane felt her throat tighten. It was like looking into a mirror of her own not-so-distant past. A father, a war veteran, who came back home with a body intact, but a mind torn in places no one could see. A father who once loved, once laughed, once taught his children right from wrong. But then, on certain days, when the wind changed, his eyes turned cloudy. He no longer knew who he was, or who his daughter even was. "My dad used to be kind, Nurse Diane," Emily continued, using her name for the first time. "He used to tell us stories about his squad mates. He bought birthday gifts for Mom. He once fixed a neighbor's broken bike. But then at some point, those stories started choking him. He'd see war footage on TV and throw the remote. He got scared during fireworks. Once, Mom left some clutter in the hallway and he lost it. He screamed that one small mistake in battle could get the whole unit killed." Emily went quiet for a long time. "I understand him. I really do. That's why I never told anyone. I thought, if he could just get the anger out, even if it meant I had to hurt, it'd be worth it, as long as he felt lighter afterward." Diane began to cry. Not loudly, just quietly, silently. A 17-year-old girl trying to make sense of someone else's pain through her own unconscious sacrifice, she whispered, "Emily, no one should have to hurt so that someone else can feel at peace. That's not love. That's how wounds keep getting passed on. And you don't have to pay the price for someone else's broken pieces." Outside, night had settled over the city. But in that small hospital room, the warm light cast its glow over 2 hands clasped together, one belonging to a girl who hadn't yet had the chance to grow up, the other to a woman who once was a victim herself, now trying to help someone heal. This wasn't just Emily's story. It was the story of thousands of children carrying invisible scars, scars from wars they never fought in. The war might have ended, but its echoes still returned, sometimes in the form of uncontrollable rage, a leather belt raised in fury, and silent victims bowing their heads to endure it. Every single day. That same night, a small meeting room on the third floor of the hospital lit up. The sound of steady rain outside pressed gently against the tension in the air. Inside, Dr. Sarah Collins, head of pediatric psychology, was leading a special meeting, joined by Diane, a representative from DCF, Department of Children and Families, and a legal guardian specializing in the protection of minors. Sarah opened the meeting with a voice that was calm but resolute. The girl is exhibiting signs of chronic defensive behavior. We've documented physical injuries, along with avoidance patterns, anxiety, and an overwhelming sense of self-blame for the abuser's actions. The DCF representative nodded and passed around a file. Based on Section 12, Article 4 of the Massachusetts Child Protection Act, we have sufficient grounds to initiate a temporary removal of custody for 72 hours pending full psychological and social evaluation. Diane clenched her hands tightly. In her mind, memories surged. The winter night she herself was taken from her home under that very same law by a nurse named Madeline, the only adult who had once told her, "No one is born to endure forever." When the meeting ended, Sarah asked Diane to stay behind. The two of them stood in the quiet hallway, staring out at the rain streaking across the glass. "I know," Diane began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, isn't simple. He used to be a good father. But wounds from war, if they're never treated, they turn into weapons. Weapons aimed at their own families." Sarah nodded gently. "We're not here to punish anyone. We're here to stop the cycle." Diane hesitated for a moment. Then, quietly, she began to share her own story. "My father was a veteran, too. He brought home 2 things from war, alcohol and a belt. My mother never fought back. Every time I got hit, she'd just turn the TV volume up to drown out my screaming. I grew up thinking that being beaten meant I'd done something wrong, and staying silent was the only way to survive." She swallowed hard, eyes fixed not on Sarah, but on the button of her white coat. "Until the day I was brought to the hospital with a fractured rib, and there was this nurse. She didn't ask too many questions. She just said, 'You don't have to endure this anymore.' She called the police. My mother cursed her out, but she didn't back down, and because of her, I got a second chance at life." Dr. Sarah Collins gave a small nod, her gaze no longer clinical, but full of quiet understanding. Across the room, Ms. Harmon, the representative from Child Protective Services, slowly closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in fatigue, but in reflection. No one spoke, but the emotion in the room was unmistakable. Diane hadn't just told her story, she had placed her heart, her history, onto the center of that table like living proof that, if no one speaks up, if no one dares to act, children like her, and like Emily, will be left to live in the dark. That afternoon, in a small room at the hospital's child psychology wing, Emily sat curled up on a blue sofa, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. She wore an oversized hoodie, her right arm still wrapped in a medical splint. Dr. Sarah Collins sat across from her, a notebook resting lightly on her lap. The pen in her hand hadn't written a single word in 10 minutes. "You can say anything you want here, Emily," she said gently. "No one's here to judge. No one's going to yell." Emily kept her gaze down. The fabric beneath her bare feet was already stained with a small damp circle from silent tears. After a long pause, she whispered, "Do you think some good people can still do bad things?" Sarah looked up. "I think there are people who used to be good, but sometimes they've been hurt so badly they forget how to love." Emily didn't meet her eyes, but she kept speaking. "I remember, once my dad made breakfast for all of us. Pancakes with syrup. He smiled a lot that day. Mom even teased him and called him chef of the house. But that night, after watching a war movie, he sat alone in the dark until morning. His eyes were red. The next day, Ken spilled his glass of milk by accident. Dad slammed his hand on the table and yelled at us, "If you can't even get the little things right, don't expect to survive." A slight tremble passed through Emily's shoulders. I think maybe Dad is still living in that horrible war zone. In his mind, maybe we're not even his children anymore. Maybe we're just pieces of something he couldn't get through. Sarah fell silent. There was such clarity and such pain in the girl's words that it caught in her throat. "Emily," Sarah said softly, "you understand so much. Far more than anyone your age should ever have to. But do you know something?" Her voice grew even gentler. "The fact that you still love him, that you worry about your mom and Ken, and that you've found the strength to speak the truth, that makes you stronger than anyone I've ever met." For the first time, Emily smiled, just a tiny, fragile curve of her lips, but real, a faint smile in the middle of a storm. Elsewhere in the hospital, Diane pulled a folded note from the pocket of her white coat. It was from Maggie, Emily's mother. "I'm sorry. I want to help her, but I'm afraid. Please, don't give up." Diane held the paper tightly in her hand, a weight pressing against her chest. Back in the therapy room, Emily went on. "He didn't stop. After yelling, when we didn't react, he just kept hitting us. He threw an ashtray. Then he grabbed us by the hair, one by one." Sarah gently placed her hand over Emily's. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. 1 week later, a closed-door meeting was held at the Child Protective Services office. After several therapy sessions, interviews, and investigations, along with medical reports, legal statements, and sworn testimony, a controversial decision was proposed. Emily would return home, but under strict monitoring conditions. Diane read the decision with a heavy expression. Dr. Sarah Collins said nothing, her fingers tightening around the pen in her hand. Emily's father, Jake, would begin a mandatory PTSD treatment program under supervision by the Department of Veterans Affairs, along with psychological support from a local community center. The Carter household would be subject to unannounced home visits by social workers each week. On the day Emily was discharged, she didn't bring much, just a few books, some clothes, and a stuffed bear that Diane had given her. She turned and hugged the nurse one more time. But this time, her eyes didn't hold only fear. They carried gratitude and something else, unfinished. "Do you think things will be okay?" Emily asked softly. Diane paused. She didn't lie. She didn't offer promises she couldn't guarantee. Instead, she took the girl's hand and held it tightly. "I don't know, but I believe in you." Emily nodded, then turned away and climbed into the family car. Her mother, Maggie, sat behind the wheel, her eyes anxious but resolute. Jake, her father, sat in the back seat, silent. As the car pulled away, Diane stood there, still watching, as if waiting for a small miracle. Maybe Emily would cry again. Maybe there would still be nights when she woke up shaking. Maybe there would be days when Jake yelled without realizing it. But maybe, just maybe, this time, they would learn how to listen to one another. Because sometimes, the hardest thing isn't running away but going back and trying to forgive. At the far end of the hospital hallway, Nurse Diane stood alone. She pulled an old photo from her coat pocket, stared at it for a moment, then slid it back into the drawer. On her desk, a new note had been taped. No one should have to carry someone else's pain, but healing is something we can do together.